So Joe Biden gave his first speech to Congress and the nation. It was big. He was boring and nobody watched. Weren't the Oscars the other day? It's Rob Nelson Live.
Hey, I'm Rob Nelson. I used to host a show on Fox, and now I do a digital live stream called Rob Nelson Live. And my whole mission is to figure out how, in this time of division, we can find common ground.
Speech, and they're not allowed to do that anymore.
I understand what you're talking about.
They be focused on rebuilding California.
Oh, it's so true. Come on. This is where this gets real. He says you're heading. I wouldn't want to be black and driving in a car. Right. Point there, right? Some of what's in this music, you can't sanitize it. All right, hey everybody, welcome to the show. Thanks for being here. Streaming at you from my virtual studio in Jacksonville, Florida, and Crafty in his virtual studio in LA, and to you guys on whatever social platforms you're on. Hey, Crafty. And we are now, yes, Monkey Arms. We are switching to do a Monday and Thursday show. We feel like that's a little better all around for everybody. Love to know your thoughts on it. It's a little more, going to go a little longer each time, but less days. So we get a little more in each day. All right. Thanks for being here. Thanks for being part of the show. As always, I love all your feedback, your comments, everybody on Facebook, YouTube, Reddit, Twitter, TikTok, Twitch, every social platform known to man, and ones that Elon Musk is about to invent. Let's get right into it. Joe Biden gave his first speech 100 days into his presidency to the Congress. And it's not every year a president gives a speech. They usually call it a State of the Union speech in January, generally, or January, February. And the first year of a presidential term, they don't give a State of the Union speech, but every president gives a speech in front of Congress, which is nationally televised. Joe Biden waited a little longer than most, which I understand. He waited for the 100-day mark because it's that big magical number. Where did it even come from? Everyone's like, the first 100 days. I think that started back with Kennedy, the first 100 days. I'll get to that, Tyler. Yes, I wanted him to juggle chainsaws. No, but I'll get to exactly why I thought what Joe Biden did, good and bad. And as we get into this, I want you to know, I thought Joe Biden offered a remarkably ambitious agenda. But first, let's just talk about the setting itself. I said it was the Oscars already were, and in many ways, this was reminiscent to me of the Oscars. They had a theater that could hold 1,600, the House chamber, and in the Capitol, and only 200 people there. 200 people, all socially distanced, spaced out. I'm sure if you've seen the pictures. Crafty, we have a picture of that, don't we? Well, maybe we don't. You socially spaced out, there it is. Socially spaced out, all in their little spots. All doing, thanks, Crafty, all doing COVID, what I call COVID theater. That is not me saying COVID isn't real or me saying that, it's not important to be sensitive to the masking and all that, but they were all vaccinated. They have to stay far apart. They wear masks. Biden doesn't wear a mask because he's talking, of course, but, I guess he could get COVID from everybody else. But beside the point, a little of it's mask theater, and I get it. But by the way, I want to be clear about something. There's a whole argument that for sociological reasons, we encourage a kind of mask theater. And some social scientists and health experts have said one of the reasons for masking when it doesn't seem to make sense is we're trying to send a message. So they're on their message. No problem with that. But the issue I do have is that no one watched. 12 million people watched. Now, that's better than the Oscars, which only got 9 million people. But 12 million is not a great number, especially because we are still in pandemic times and most people are still home. More are going out, but again, it's not 4th of July where you can have small barbecues yet. Trump got 48 million people in his first speech as a comparison. 48 million people watched Trump's 2017 first speech to Congress. 12 million watched Joe Biden. It was boring. Joe Biden was boring. Tyler asked what I wanted to do, juggle chainsaws. No, he's just a boring speaker. I don't care. I don't care what you say. Joe Biden's boring to watch. And that's why people don't watch. I'm not arguing whether he has some good things to say. He's just a boring speaker. Kamala Harris is not a boring speaker. Trump certainly wasn't a boring speaker. Most presidents, modern day presidents, aren't boring speakers. George Bush was a boring speaker, but he was boring. The Guardian, a left-wing magazine, so I'm not, going to quote the right here, described his speech as big, boring, and bipartisan with a question mark. As I said, boring, definitely. You know, I have a rule as a guy who does TV, done TV a lot of my life. You know, when I first was on Fox News, you know, the head of Fox News taught me this lesson that, you know, he'd watch everybody with the sound off before he would hire anyone, because if you weren't watchable, no one would listen to what you have to say. And I've always said, it doesn't matter how important what you have to say is if people don't want to watch you. We're in a video era, in a television age, well, television now, a digital age. And if you're not engaging to watch, people don't watch. So that's too bad for Biden, because what he had to say actually was something that I think needed to be heard. Was his speech big? Absolutely, 100%, definitely big. I mean, Joe Biden may have offered the most ambitious, far-reaching agenda of any president since Roosevelt. Whether you're on the right or the left, it was funny. Fort Walton Bleach. I watch paint dry for a living. Look, if you're a political junkie, you'll watch this stuff. I watched all of it. And my bias toward Biden about being boring has nothing to do with what he had to say. It was a big speech. It was the most ambitious agenda a president has put out in a good 80 years. I mean, $2.3 trillion in an infrastructure plan, the American Jobs Bill, $1.8 trillion in the New American Families Plan, which includes 2 years of subsidized or completely covered community college, child care credits, paid family leave. I mean, big social ticket items. He talked about doing the minimum wage up to $15. And again, I'm not judging any of these things right now. I'm just laying them out. $15 minimum wage. Close the gender wage gap, worker bargaining rights, meaning make it easier for unions to negotiate, expand access to health care, deal with Medicare being able to negotiate prescription drug prices to bring them down, called for comprehensive immigration reform. And if not that, at least deal with DACA, the deferred action recipients, the kids who are here, a massive tax increase plan targeted at the ultra rich and at corporations, more at corporations than anybody else, taking the top rate for earners from 39.6 to 37, not a big jump, but for corporations and for capital gains tax, taking the capital gains tax from 20 to 38.6. It's actually like there's a 3.8% payroll tax on top of that. So really, it's like a doubling of the capital gains tax. He called for gun reform, dealing with the assault weapons ban, passed the Violence Against Women's Act. He wanted police reform. He wanted H.R. 1, the Voting Rights Act passed. I mean, this was ambitious. And each one of those things could be a whole show, and maybe we'll do some on it. We're talking a massive call for a progressive social change agenda. And Fort Walton Bleach, yeah, you found it refreshing. Fair enough. And I'm sure a lot of people did. Again, I'm making a little fun of him being boring. I've said from the start, he's a boring speaker. I will say this, much of what he proposed are things I've stood for and backed for a long time. I remember a book 15 years ago that called for a lot of these same things. Now, you know, this is where those of you who think I'm on the right might be a little surprised. I've got a lot of questions about what Biden wanted to do here, but fundamentally, I have said for a long time, we have been ignoring critical needs. We've ignored critical infrastructure needs for 35, 40 years. Biden expanded the definition of infrastructure way beyond roads, bridges, railroads, that kind of stuff, waterways, the electricity grid, to digital infrastructure. And some of the right will argue he adds in a lot of other things, climate change things, that kind of stuff. That infrastructure bill is going to get pared down, cut in half. But they're going to hopefully pass one. But infrastructure, dealing with investments in families and communities, whether it's providing resources for childcare, that's a good example. Expanding educational opportunities, you know, putting 2 years of preschool, not kindergarten, not whatever daycare, but preschool on, and 2 years of community college on the end. Dealing with tax reform. I don't agree with his tax reform, but I think we need actual real tax reform. Dealing with guns, dealing with you know, all issues that I think, immigration reform. I've been saying for 12 years, we need to deal with the fact that we have a massive number of people in this country, 11 to 15 million to 20 million, depending on how you count it, who are living here still technically considered undocumented, or if you want to say pejoratively, illegal immigrants, and they've been living here. They're part of our society. All these things are things that are valid to want to deal with, and need to be dealt with. But will they be dealt with? Was it a bipartisan message? Not at all. And even The Guardian, which kind of joked and said, he mentioned Republicans like twice. He kept throwing out unity and kept saying, come on, we all need to work together. And by the way, look at what you're comparing him to. Trump was the ultimate divider. You're comparing him to a guy who literally divided division. So the Joe Biden seems more unifying. Well, it'd be hard not to. And Joe Biden is fundamentally more of a unifier in that he's a moderate. He's been 40 years in Congress as a senator who was always negotiating the path between Democrats and Republicans. So it's not surprising that deep down, Biden probably wants to work with people. He wants both sides to come together. Debatable whether they will. Let me quickly address the false claims because I'm going to get them out of the way real quick here. And it's part of what bothers me about all these speeches, and every president does it. They make a lot of claims that aren't true. Biden started out his thing saying that I inherited the worst, a country that was, facing the worst pandemic in a century, the worst economic crisis since the Great Depression, and the worst attack on democracy since the Civil War. Okay, 1 out of 3 ain't bad. Meatloaf was 2 out of 3. Worst pandemic in a century, 100%. The worst economy since the Great Depression. Again, my issue with both sides is just stop claiming it's all you and they're all the problem. You're not going to heal or pull together a country where we're remarkably divided, both in the electorate and, in Biden's case, in his own government. The Senate 50-50, the House is majority Democrats, but they can't take that for granted either because there's conservative Democrats. The truth is the U.S. economy lost 20 plus million jobs last spring. By November, half those jobs had been gained back. The unemployment rate in April 2020 was hovering under 15%, 14.8, I think. By January, it was 6.8. Since Biden became president in March, it went from 6.8 to 6. So you didn't actually inherit the worst economy ever. You inherited an economy that had gained back much of what it lost during the first 9 months of the pandemic. Unemployment had gone from 14.8 to 6.8 when you became president. It fell another 0.8% since you were president. I get it. He's not going to acknowledge that the administration before did anything good, but it doesn't serve him not to. Acknowledge that, I inherited a rough economy that we're still trying to recover from. Thank God we made as much progress as we did. He's just dividing and alienating when he claims that. The fun sidebar one, 17 million miles. I traveled 17 million miles with President Xi from China. I don't know why he makes this stuff up or why. I don't know why. What's the point of it? I show that they're buddies. I mean, by the way, I'm proud of the fact that he called out autocracies and he called out China, which was another plus of what he said. But he didn't travel 17,000 miles with President Xi, and he said it before. Why? I don't know why he keeps saying it. The only times he ever traveled with President Xi, they went to some high school in China. So maybe they traveled like 50 miles. Just an odd one. The jobs plan, millions of new jobs, trillions in growth. Again, he says both sides say that. It's debatable. Penn Wharton, the Wharton School at Penn State, University of Pennsylvania, actually estimates that his plan will actually decrease GDP by about 1% by 2050. Others say it will push it up. Moody's Analytical said short-term growth will go down, long-term will go up. Again, it's not a terrible claim, but, and I get it. Everybody says we're going to create tons of jobs and we're going to make lots of growth and it's not going to cost anybody anything. Jury's out on the assault weapons ban. I've said before, there's no hard evidence that assault weapon ban worked. There's no hard evidence that it didn't. It was very inconclusive whether it worked. I'm going to get to gun stuff a little more later. He said 11 million people came over the border. Most of them overstayed their visas. Again, it's political posturing. Most of them came over the border illegally, and that's okay. They live here now. Just acknowledge it. They came illegally. They've lived here for a long time. They deserve to be part of our community, part of our society. The big one for me, though, was around taxes, because this is a misstatement that I actually want what he wants done, but think he's missing the mark in not being honest about the scenario. I want to play a clip that Biden said about taxing corporations, 55 Fortune 500 corporations that pay $0 in taxes. Can we play that clip, Crafty?
55 of the nation's biggest corporations paid zero federal tax last year. Those 55 corporations made in excess of $40 billion in profit. for offshoring jobs and shifting profits overseas. It's not right. We're going to reform corporate taxes so they pay their fair share and help pay for the public investments their businesses will benefit from as well.
All right, I'm going to address that clip in a second. I want to back up to a couple comments people made, and then I'll move forward with that clip, Crafty. Tyler Boyden said, then state the worst economy since the Depression, Rob. Tyler, the worst economy since the Depression, was the pandemic economy. My point is Biden didn't inherit the worst economy since the Depression. He inherited an economy that had gained back over half of what it had lost. We would have actually in a slightly better position than the 2007 crash, and that unemployment had fallen from 15% to 6.8%. So my point is, you didn't inherit the worst economy. You inherited an economy battered by a pandemic that the administration before you had, and the government before you, and the people before you had started to crawl out of. My issue is the partisanship, Tyler. By refusing to acknowledge, I get you to want to give Trump credit. Say you don't like Trump. Say you think Trump's a horrible guy. He was a horrible unifier. You think he was a terrible president. But acknowledge what happened during that time, because for half the country that supports that other side, they see it as, and Trump did the same thing, they see it as complete dismissal of what the other side has accomplished or what was accomplished during the time the other side was in office. We are a divided country. We are a partisan country. Let's acknowledge where we've really come to and then say we still got work to do. That's all I'm saying about it. Jimmy Stock said, I don't know if we had that comment, but he said that he didn't think Joe Biden was pursuing a moderate agenda. I don't think that he is pursuing a moderate agenda. I said I think at core he's a moderate centrist Democrat. I think he's pushing a very aggressive agenda. I think I would call it a progressive agenda, and I'm okay with a lot of that. But, the truth is, I guess I'm a progressive in sheep's clothing or something, because I've always believed in a largely progressive agenda. It doesn't mean I agree with everything he's trying to do or how he's trying to do it, but we've failed to meet so many fundamental needs in our society. And the solutions to me aren't going to be left or right. I'm tired of that divide. I use it because that's how we see the world. But the truth is, we're not really left-right. The solutions come from both sides, and it's more of a circle and a center, and we need to sort of hone in on that. Okay, going back now to the clip on the corporations, because this is an interesting one. It's always bugged me. Thanks, Crafty. It's always bugged me that these giant corporations pay zero taxes. And I've said it for so long. It just used to push my buttons. Like, why is Amazon pay $0 in federal taxes? Why do so many big U.S. corporations pay $0 in taxes? It's something that's always infuriated me about our taxation system. Our taxation system fundamentally punishes the poorer, not the poorest poor, but the middle class more than it does the upper class and the corporations. And I'm not a fan of massive taxation on corporations. I don't know that doubling, the tax rate on corporations is going to actually fix the problem. But the sad part is that raising tax rates won't make major corporations have to pay taxes. And this is where they just stick to the surface and never get to the real underlying thing. And that's what bugs me about what happened with Biden's stuff around taxes. The truth is, his plan won't do a thing to change most of those corporations not paying taxes. You know why? Because they are allowed under the law, which is going to still stay in place. They're not changing this. They've already done some changes, and they're not touching this, that allows companies to deduct expenses, allows them to deduct investments, allows them to deduct compensation to executives. Now, you might argue that's a good thing, but that very deductive process that allows them to sort of use tax credits and deductions is why they move their tax base to zero. It's not that they're cheating. They also do stuff offshore. So while he's saying, doing the call out, let's make the big corporations pay, you're not going to really make them pay. All the projects and programs you're calling for, the massive investments in infrastructure and technology development, let's get a cure for cancer. Every company that makes those investments is going to write them off, and they're going to write those massive investments off and drop their tax base. So if your issue is, again, now you might argue, well, that's how business grows, but don't think you're going to get the tax revenues out of that, because you're not. They're all still going to come in at zero. and they're going to push stuff offshore, and they're going to keep their tax base low. When it comes to rich people, I've said forever, I'm for rich people paying more taxes, but rich people don't want to pay more taxes, most of them, and most of them find a way out of it. Years ago, I knew Stanley Druckenmiller, who's a billionaire now, and he was a multimillionaire then. And I remember him telling me during the Clinton years, when Clinton raised taxes, he was going to spend whatever it took on lawyers to not pay the taxes because he didn't want to give the money to the government. And I said, well, how much are you willing to spend? He said, $50-60 million. I'm like, on lawyers? He's like, rather do that than give it to the government. Rich people get our own taxes. Corporations lower their taxes. If you're hoping to make the money up in taxes, you're going to need to deal with the underlying issues and source. And on a personal level, I think we should get rid of the income tax altogether and just have a flat, get rid of the structured so-called regressive income tax. It's progressive, but it's really regressive, and just have a flat tax, same percent for everybody, no deductions. I don't care what you make. You could even put it on corporations, set a number, 10%, whatever it is. Everybody pays 10%, period. No exceptions, no excuses, no deductions, no nothing. You all pay the same on your income. It would actually work. I don't know why we've never tried it, but my point in taking all of this too is that what I really think is Biden missed the elephant in the room. Let's play the second clip we have of Biden, Crafty.
We've stared into the abyss of insurrection and autocracy, pandemic and pain, and we, the people, did not flinch. At the very moment our adversaries were certain we'd pull apart and fail, we came together, we united. With light and hope, we summoned a new strength, new resolve to position us to win the competition of the 21st century.
Okay, so what I want to say about that is I picked that line because I think that is that was Biden at his best. That was the least boring part of the speech to me, when he kind of waxed a little poetic there, and he looked very statesmanlike and dignified. And I was like, oh, okay, I get it. Here's my problem with what he's saying. He's missing the elephant in the room. And by that, I don't mean the Republicans. The reality is we did not come together. In our greatest moment of adversity, we did not come together. We, in fact, ripped ourselves apart. We are more divided, more divisive, more hostile toward those on the other side than we ever have been. Ever. Depression or not depression, ever. And sidebar, the insurrection of the Capitol was not the worst thing since Civil War. 9/11 was worse. Pearl Harbor was worse. The insurrection of the Capitol was an offensive thing and politically charged. Our democracy was never for 1 second in trouble. Ever, ever, ever. And I'm tired of people saying it was. But we didn't come together. We haven't come together. We are divided. And Biden, missing the elephant in the room, is refusing to address that division. I get that he kept calling, like, let's all work together. I want Republicans to come talk to me. He was talking to the insiders. You want to bring the country together? You're going to have to acknowledge, what the other side has done or stands for that's okay, and you're going to have to challenge your side and call them out on what's not okay. You can still have your ambitious agenda. You can still have your progressive agenda and say, let's talk about it, let's duke it out. But you can't do that if you're going to alienate half the country because you're going to just dismiss who they are, what they stand for, ignore what your side and the other half has done or does that's not okay. Until we get a president who can do that, who can cross that line, we are going to go nowhere. Until we find a way to have a leader who acknowledges both sides have failed, both sides do some things right, nobody's inherently bad except for, you want to go the fringe, whatever. Sure, you want to say white supremacists are inherently bad. Okay, that's a tiny sliver of America, You want to throw, the small groups who are just completely horrendous, go ahead. You want to say Antifa's horrible, go ahead. But for the most part, people are well-intentioned in what they want, and no one's brought us together to unite around that. Secondly, Biden's biggest challenge, Cruzen, yes, I want to stick by that statement. We are more divided than ever, and I'll tell you quickly why. We are more divided than ever because in the past, we were divided. Look, even during the Civil War, that may be the most divided time America's ever faced. We literally went to war. And other than that, so let me say other than the Civil War, we've never been so divided in terms of we've always been partisan, but in terms of people literally dividing each other, hating people for having different views. James Carville, my last thought on this, the strategist from the Clinton administration, got Clinton elected, said this week in an interview, he wants Biden to succeed, but he's like, the woke left could destroy the Democratic Party's agenda. And James Carville is, interestingly, he's been married to Mary Matlin for decades. And Mary Matlin ran George Bush's campaign while Carville ran Clinton's campaign. How did those two come home at night? And I knew James Carville. Like they got along. They said they just dropped politics at the door. We could never do that now. So yes, I think we are more divided. And I want to wrap this part of the show up on this thought that we essentially are divided, not coming together. But here's the real problem Joe Biden faces. And if you care about seeing these changes happen, here's the real challenge he's going to face, which is that right now, when he made all those calls, like, I need Republicans to come join me, he controls both houses. But he controls the House by a narrow majority and the Senate's evenly split. And none of those big, ambitious things he wants to push through are going to pass. They're just not. You're not going to get comprehensive immigration reform through. We should, but we're not. You're not going to get the infrastructure plan the size you want it through. You're not going to get the American families, New American Families Act through. You're not going to get a minimum wage through. You're not going to get gun reform through because there are too many conservatives, even in the Senate, too many. One vote, you're done. And until you can get Republicans to come across the line, you're not going to be able to make change, because even with his party in control, they can't do it. So he's actually got to really appeal to the right, really appeal to Republicans and the Republican base if he wants any chance of them coming over, because he can't do it with the Democrats alone. And that is a challenge. I'm going to pick up more of this stuff, all of this stuff, as we go forward in future shows. Gun violence. Guns and gun violence was an area he left it on. Like, let's do gun reform. And everyone's been talking about gun reform forever. I want to switch gears. I want to talk about the NRA for a second. I'm done with the NRA. I'm sure many of you heard what happened with NRA President Wayne Lapierre. About 7 years ago, he went on an elephant hunt in Botswana, managed to keep that video secret until this week when it emerged. I'm going to show you two really hard to watch videos. The first is Wayne Lapierre trophy hunting a bull elephant. I don't know what's more offensive, that he's doing it or that he can't do it. Watch this very condensed clip of a multi-minute video.
Right. Good shot.
Just an inch low.
Do you hear that? That's condensed, right? That he shoots it, drops it with a guide right there, and then he can't kill the elephant. He doesn't kill it the first time. He's close range. The guide keeps pointing him. If you watch the whole video, torture yourself if you want to get fumed beyond belief. And he keeps not killing it from close range. Like, you hear the elephant moaning. And it's like, one, I'm going to go off on the hunting an elephant, but two, you're the head of the NRA. Like, someone had a tweet. We have a tweet of someone who said, can you pop that tweet up, Crafty? Who said that Wayne Lapierre managed to, in which, commenting on Shannon Watts, CEO Wayne Lapierre manages to alienate both hunters and gun owners, because not only is he inhumane, but he's a horrible shot. And it's like, I'll add to that, thanks, Crafty, and any anti-gun people. Like, there's a hunting code in the NRA that you master your marksmanship so that you make, you may not like the wording, but so that you make clean shots and clean kills. I mean, it's just like horrible. And then he laughs. He laughs when he can't kill it. Okay, that set me like pretty over the top, but I'm going to show you one more before I really go off on this, because his wife then shoots an elephant as well. She's a better shot, but I want you to watch, as hard as it is, I want you to watch this elephant, not afraid of her, because it doesn't view her as a natural threat coming toward her. Take a look.
You want it off?
You see that top line between the eyes?
Good shot. Hey, come with me. Come with me. Come with me. Come with me.
Leave the stick.
Okay. Someone put up a comment, why do we care if anyone hunts elephants? So I'll tell you why. I'm not anti-hunting. I'm not anti-hunting at all. I'm actually have hunters in my family. I'm all for hunting. If hunting is done where you're killing an animal and you're eating that animal, I understand that many times, places like where I'm from in Wisconsin, you have an overpopulation of deer or elk or bear, and you you cull the population down. It's done on a highly permitted basis. If you didn't cull that population down, they would die of hunger. Elephants are almost extinct. The savanna elephant is an endangered species. It's fallen 60% in 50 years. There are almost less than 400,000 left, most of them in Botswana. They are endangered. The only reason they're not completely extinct is because they've done massive anti-poaching efforts. So you have this hypocrisy of an anti-poaching effort where you raise penalties and fines, but then you let rich trophy hunters like Wayne Lapierre go in and shoot them for fun? How hypocritical is that? Why do I care about hunting elephants? Because I don't like hunting hyper-intelligent beings. Elephants are one of the 4 smartest mammals on Earth. Us, dolphins, chimpanzees, and elephants. And most research in the last decade has shown that elephants are as smart as chimpanzees and as smart as dolphins. They are one of the most cognitively advanced beings on the planet. They can mimic behavior. They show altruism. They can use tools. They can communicate. They can use tools. If one has a thing and another doesn't in a test, they'll work together to make it work. They show compassion. They're self-aware. They mourn their dead. Have you ever seen an animal mourn its dead? Horses are not anywhere near as smart as elephants. I watched recently a horse I've ridden for years mourn the loss of his, not biological, but sister who had been in the same place with him for 20 years. He was inconsolable for 2 weeks. He wouldn't eat. He stormed back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, literally screaming the whole time. If he didn't finally eat, he was going to die. He's still, months later, sad. You can see it. You can see him lose it once in a while. Elephants are way past that. They literally mourn their dead. She shot that trusting animal at point blank range in the head for fun. Why do I care? Because it's disgusting. It's offensive. It pushes every button in me. And I'm pro-gun and I'm pro-hunting. But I am not pro that kind of stuff. And it's a disgrace to the NRA who's trying to sit here and actually fight for a legitimate thing, which is our Second Amendment right. And it's doing nothing but making that harder every single day. So my real issue isn't about elephants. It's about the NRA. The NRA is a joke. It's a total joke and a disgrace. A disgraceful organization to be representing gun owners in this country at a time when gun rights are at stake. When we do have a legitimate debate about it, and I want gun rights preserved in the right way. Wayne Lapierre, took tons of money out of the coffers of the NRA. He's being investigated for tax fraud. The New York Attorney General's, basically trying to shut them down for mismanagement, negligent oversight, self-dealing. They've mishandled that organization, and they've just become a giant fat lobbyist that looks out for itself, all the while claiming they're trying to protect gun rights. I'm not saying they don't actually care about gun rights or that members don't, but the NRA is divisive and useless, and it's not helping win the battle to find a common ground around guns. So my argument, let's get rid of the NRA. Let's replace the NRA with something. I came up with an acronym, AURGO. I know it's not very catchy, but neither is LBGTQ. The Americans United for Responsible Gun Ownership, an organization that represents all gun owners and even people who are not anti-gun but want responsible gun ownership. So you at least you're supportive of it, even if you don't own a gun yourself. The Americans United for Responsible Gun Ownership. Because everybody who's a gun owner says, I want responsible gun ownership. I'm not in favor of irresponsible gun ownership. What you'll see often on the right is people going, but all your gun control laws aren't really stopping responsible gun owners like me. They are. I mean, they're hurting me, but they're not going to stop irresponsible people. They're not going to stop criminals. They're not going to stop people who have guns illegally. They're not going to stop gangs. That's the argument they make, understandably. Do you know that the real issue, the real issue with gun violence is one we can't address. We can't, I agree it did lose all legitimacy decades ago, monkey arms, but it managed to stay relevant, and it's hurt It's hurt the movement to preserve gun rights. I am pro-gun. My family has guns. I took my little nephew with my older nephew, who's a good shooter, shooting when he was like 10. Like, I'm not anti-gun at all. I'm not anti-hunting. I understand why people want guns for self-defense. I understand why they want it for hunting. I understand why they want it for sport. But the NRA's done nothing in the last 10 years to help that cause. But we can't focus on the real gun issue. And here's where I'm going to go. Gun violence, and it's going to be a surprise to you on the left, I think. Maybe not a good one, but one I think you need to have. There were 20,000 gun deaths in 2020. It's the highest number of gun deaths ever. And that's gun deaths, by the way, not counting suicides. Suicides actually are higher, 24,000 suicides in 2020 by gun. It's a higher number than the total number of gun deaths. The total number of gun deaths, not counting suicides, is 20,000. It's double that with suicides. But most gun violence happens in Black communities, and that includes mass shootings. And before you think, oh no, don't go black on black violence, I am, but not the way you think. Most gun violence, including mass shootings, happens in Black communities, not in white communities. The trace.org is a great organization, a sort of a news journalism outlet to look at. It's very much on the left. It's very much on it's centrist left. It's very much in the gun prevention space. It's very much not a pro-gun thing, and it tracks all kinds of gun data. And trace.org's done a lot of work looking at trace.org at how gun violence really happens. 50% of the majority Black census tracts in the U.S. are the gun deaths are highest in the 50% highest gun deaths are in Black census tracts. But Black majority census tracts are only 10% of all census tracts. So it's like 5 times as high, the gun violence in Black communities. And like I said, that includes mass shootings, because mass shootings are anytime 4 or more people are wounded or killed, and they don't get the coverage they should get. They get dismissed. They get written off. The left-wing mainstream media does it because they don't want to give credit to that because they think it's going to hurt their race narrative. But the truth is, it's Black activists who are on the left who point this out the most. I want to show you a couple tweets. Amber Goodwin, who's the head of the Community Justice Action Fund, said this. When these mass shootings happen in white communities, everybody has a response. They have policies, investments, thoughts, and prayers. When Black people are shot and killed, it's a lack of response, or if there is a response, it's divestment. It's carceral. She's not a right winger. She's a Black activist saying you ignore mass shootings in Black communities. You dismiss them. You underplay them, but you get them tons of attention when they're white communities. Here's the second tweet. This one's from Devon Bogan, the organization called Advance Peace. Mass shootings in Black and brown communities may be new to you all, not new to us, said Devon Bogan. It's a Bay Area group. And it's never been considered a mass shooting. Not until white folks started dying did we start hearing about this phenomenon called mass shootings. But drive-by shootings, i.e. mass shootings, have been happening forever, COVID or not. What I'm getting at here is that there is, thanks, Crafty, that there is within the Black community, thanks, Crafty, there is within the Black community, and I spend a lot of time in these communities and I have throughout my life, there's a awareness of the level of violence, and they want it stopped and they want it addressed. And the media narrative that doesn't want to go there because somehow they think they'll be supporting the right if they do that is just ridiculous. Most shootings are in Black communities. Mass shootings are in Black communities. You know, Fernando Rejon, Latino, runs the Urban Peace Initiative in LA. And he said, you know, we assume shootings in the Black community are gang related. They're involved in something criminal. You know, we kind of demonize them. And he said, it's really systemic racism. Like, you get to decide what lives are valuable instead of realizing our lives are valuable. Not just when a cop shoots one person. The most shootings, the most violence, the most mass shootings are happening in Black communities. And we barely talk about it, except Fox News, which does it for its political reasons to kind of point out, hey, by the way, see you guys over there. It's not police. It's Black people shooting Black people, which again, to Rajan's kind of narrative is right. All kind of people, thugs in the neighborhood shooting each other up. It's horrible that where the most violence and most shooting occurs, both mass and individual, gets routinely dismissed. But that's where the majority of gun violence is in this country. It's not in white suburban shootings, and it's not in police shootings. It's in Black communities where people are getting shot and killed every day. That's the epicenter of gun violence in America. This is not a left-right issue. We've got to stop making it one. It's a lives issue. It's a Black lives issue because it's Black lives that are dying. Monkey Arms, who's the good guys with guns in this scenario? Well, I'm not making a case for good guys with guns. I'm saying you're not. I'm saying if you want to go after most gun owners who are licensed and responsibly carrying their guns, you're not getting anywhere. Most of the shootings that are happening in Black communities aren't people who are carrying licensed weapons. They don't have a concealed permit, you know. And that's true of, you know, most shootings, right? I mean, most people go shoot. Some do, but most of them got it at the last minute when you have these crazy mass shooters who go in a supermarket. But I guess my point is I want us to change our frame a little bit. Think of it this way. The CDC, the Center for Disease Control, the CDC has an $11 billion budget. Here's where I'm going to take you. I'm going to take you off the path you normally go down. How much do you think the CDC spends? If we're going to acknowledge that gun violence is an epidemic, and if you get upset, you go, well, it's a mental health epidemic. It's all kinds of things, right? It's an issue of too many guns. You know, people say guns don't kill people. People do. That's why I made the joke, guns don't kill elephants. Stupid people do. But, you know, it's a complex problem, both the weapon, both the mindset, both mental health, both the climate of violence. All of it comes together. But it's a gun violence. You know, the CDC director, Rachel Walensky, said racism's a mental health issue and should be done as a health issue. Well, I think it's pretty obvious that gun violence is a health issue. So how much money do you think the CDC spends of its $11 billion budget on actually researching gun violence, the causes of it, cures for it, solutions for it? Because let's acknowledge, gun violence is an epidemic. It is a massive public health issue. COVID may be number one, gun violence probably number two on all levels, right? And, you know, suicide's 24,000. I lost a brother to suicide. He died by suicide with a gun put in his head. It's a personal issue to me, gun violence. It's a personal issue to anybody who's lost anybody, period, however they lost them through gun violence. How much do you think the CD spends? How much? In 2016, they spent $5 million. $5 million out of an $11 billion budget. Finally, last year, 2019, they raised it for the first time since 1996 to a whopping $25 million. That's it. $25 million the CDC spends on looking into gun violence. That's 5 HIV studies. That's 5 cancer studies. $5 million for a study. It's for the CDC to look into something. $25 million with what before the pandemic is probably our greatest health threat. One of our greatest health threats. Why don't they spend more? Why aren't we focused on that? I'll tell you one reason they don't. This stupid thing called the Dickey Amendment, which was passed because of the NRA, which managed to jam it in, you know, like 20 years ago, that said no money can be spent to actually work against messaging that would be suggesting restricting guns. But they read that, you know, if you read into this and you look at what people are saying, former CDC directors, people who ran these institutes in the CDC, people read that so narrowly. But they finally said you can't spend more, and we're up to $25 million. Why don't we spend some of our $11 billion health budget, maybe a little less on masks and a little more on mask research and a little more on how we address the epidemic of gun violence? Because we're not even spending the money at our federal government to address it. So if Joe Biden wants to talk about, and politicians want to talk about, let's have gun reform. Let's get rid of assault weapons. Maybe that'll work. Maybe it won't. Let's get rid of high capacity magazines. That certainly will help. Let's do all that. How about let's spend $1 billion on research or $500 million on research to understand the causes of gun violence and to look at creative and innovative cures for gun violence? Why don't we start doing that? That's an out-of-the-box solution that no one's talking about. Instead, we're just going to talk in our polarized way. Guns are bad. Guns are good. Let's pass our Gun Prevention Act and eliminate guns. And people on the other side will be like, I'm going to keep my guns. You're going to take all my guns away. Jimmy Stock, I disagree that gun violence is not an issue for a vast majority of Americans. And I appreciate that opinion, and depends maybe where you're coming from. But I think at this point, if you were to polls show that gun violence ranks up there as like a top 3 or 4 issue for most Americans, because everybody's experienced it in some way. It doesn't mean they literally are afraid someone's going to come into their house and shoot them. But I'm going to argue, even if it's not for a lot of people who are in middle class and upper class communities, still they are increasingly affected by gun violence. I'm going to argue it is for a vast majority of those in urban communities. And addressing those communities of color and white rural communities where there's high levels of gun violence are important to address, because that's, again, one of them where the epicenter of the violence is, and it's a lot of lost life. It's a lot of lost potential, and there's a lot of fear in those communities. So I want to kind of go out on a sort of a creative idea. What if we did this? Let's look at schools and guns. So that's one. One is invest in research. And I'm going to argue with anybody on either side that our failure to look at I do think gun violence is a real issue in America. I don't think it's like the top issue facing most Americans, but I think it's something we're highly aware of. And as I said, most communities have been affected by it increasingly. And I don't think the answer is to try to just take away everybody's guns, or even just do, more registration and, all that, because people are going to still get guns who shouldn't have guns. And I'm all for people owning guns legally, legitimately, and being responsible. When we talk about responsible gun ownership, what we do with guns is a lot of what we did with sex and maybe even drugs with young people. We say, don't do it. Don't do it. Don't, the whole abstinence thing. It's great to teach your kids to be abstinent, 100%, Don't go have sex before you're ready to. Just wait. It's not worth it. But what about when kids do? So the argument was, we'll teach them how to have safe sex because they're going to have it anyway. No, we're not going to teach them. We're not going to talk about it. Denying conversation doesn't make people behave differently, just makes them behave badly. If you ever find those families where your parents were like mine were like this, like if you're gonna don't drink. But if you're gonna drink, do it at home. If you're gonna go out and party, bring your friends here where you're safe. It's like, why don't we do that with guns? Why, instead of insisting that we're gonna just tell people guns are bad, keep guns away, why don't we have a mandatory program in every school where police officers from that community come in as part of the community policing thing, and they teach kids about guns. And they don't just teach kids why guns are dangerous. They teach kids how to use a gun. I'm not saying put a loaded gun in every kid's hand, but teach a kid how to use a gun. So not so they know how to shoot someone, so they don't accidentally shoot someone. Teach them how you never point the gun at another person, loaded or unloaded. Teach them how to turn a safety on off. Teach them how it works. Teach them how never use this weapon, but understand how dangerous it is, so you can't even pick it up. But if you do, you need to know these things. Otherwise, you're going to shoot somebody. And literally have an integrated course to understand how guns work, how to be safe with guns, why guns are the good and the bad of having them, responsibly as you are older using them, and understanding the intricacies of gun violence and how destructive and deadly they are and how bad it can be and how much, again, what if we educated them instead of going in this all or nothing thing? Wouldn't that make more sense, and bring police into that process as they also talk about policing and why they, the whole idea of trying to de-escalate, force de-escalation? Wouldn't it make sense to have them in the room, like doing that in every single school in America? Now you might argue, no, we shouldn't be bringing that into our classrooms. Why not? We've already got school guardians in most schools. They have guns. Why do you keep kids from understanding what this is, what this weapon is? It can be a dangerous weapon. It's the only thing where we just like hands off, instead of teaching people how. Two ideas. One, massive investments in mental health around guns. Two, training kids in schools how guns work, gun safety as a required course, as well as kind of expanding the dialogue around guns and their role in our society. Two outside the box things, because I'm all for like people getting up on their high horse and going, let's do it. Let's call for new laws, and Congress may or may not pass it. Because I'll go back to, the idea that Joe Biden's going to have a hard time passing any major legislative initiative. So to bring this all back to how do we make change, we're going to have to make it incrementally. I'm for big ideas. Don't get me wrong. I'm for progressive big ideas. I want to see things change. I'm also not for just like a pour money down the sinkhole approach. Trillions of dollars of spending that sinks our economy and doesn't create growth is not a good outcome, not a good answer. Again, it seems to be one side or the other side, instead of finding a coming together where we find solutions from both. We are going to have to invest more. We're going to have to spend more. But we're going to have to encourage that investment. And that investment is going to require companies to keep writing off and not paying as much taxes. We're going to have to stimulate growth, not just fund things. But that said, we need massive investments. We need investments in our infrastructure. We need investments in families. We need resources to grow. But those have to be smartly made to grow on. And again, nothing's going to get done, nothing at all, if we're not willing to acknowledge there are really two sides, two philosophies in this. And right now, they're not even talking to each other. Joe Biden can't get anything major through Congress, and he controls both houses of Congress. And in 2022, he's probably going to lose at least one of them. So we're going to go back to the cycle of just getting nothing done. I, for one, am over that. I want to see us get something done. So what if we started looking at it as a circle instead of two sides, and pull into that circle all different ideas and resources, green light thinking, and come up with some new ways to address some old problems. It's Rob Nelson Live. Thanks for watching.